Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswati Vyasam Tato Jayam Udiraye. Thank you very much. We're reading from Srimad Bhagavad Gita as it is, chapter 4. We're beginning chapter 4. So the chapter is entitled Transcendental Knowledge. Now, in the summary, this chapter has two topics. The first one is the knowledge, the science of discharging one's prescribed duties in Krishna consciousness has to be learned from a guru, has to be received from a guru coming in parampara. And that the Lord himself takes on the role of perpetuating this parampara. He personally takes it on. He doesn't even delegate it. His personal responsibility. So he wants human society to learn the science of performing prescribed duties in Krishna consciousness. He wants. It's such a significant, important mission. The second topic covered is Krishna's own uniqueness. He is not only the perpetuator of this knowledge, but he is the beginning. He begins this knowledge. He is the source. And of course he maintains, perpetuates it in society. And finally, the second part of that second topic is that to know him is the perfection of all transcendental knowledge. So this covers the entire chapter, these two topics. Now, I'm going to answer a few questions that I raised myself. One of my habits. So the question is, how does chapter 4 begin, leading from chapter 4? What's the connection? Where did it flow? So now if you go back in chapter 3, in text 31, 32, Krishna uses these two words together twice in those two verses, one in each. Me matam, my instruction. Krishna is referring to his instructions. So now he wants to explain that my instructions has been the basis. This knowledge is my instruction, has been the basis of understanding by which the saintly kings governed their kingdom, starting from the saintly kings in the heavenly planets. So now, so there's Krishna's role, but also there's the generic role of a teacher, of a guru. Also, Krishna is taking himself serve as a role of a teacher, although he is the teacher. But he also brings in. So Prabhupada mentioned in the purport to text 38, he said, in the human form of life, one can conquer the enemy lust by cultivation of Krishna consciousness under able guidance. That last three words, under able guidance. So there was those connections from chapter 3 that are being followed up in chapter 4. Able guidance. Krishna and Krishna's representative. So now the other question is, we said discharging one's prescribed duties in Krishna consciousness. So the question can be, where does it say in Krishna consciousness? I'm kind of used to having a very skeptical audience. They don't always believe, so they like to question, where does it say? So actually, that word in Krishna consciousness is incorporated in the word yoga. Yoga means to link. Krishna consciousness is the linking process. Therefore, so if you remember, even in chapter 2, the phrase was buddhi yoga. So Krishna consciousness is there. There's a final point to consider in this chapter, that able guidance, under able guidance, it essentially means training. It means training from a spiritual master. Instruction is not just verbal, it's training. We're speaking of training. We're speaking of a person being trained to become Krishna conscious. So you can be skeptical again and say, well, I don't see any words training here. Well, look for the words like cultivation. Look for the words like imparted, education, culture. All to do with training. A rose by any name will smell it. So training by any name will mean training. You don't have to be pedantic and say, I don't see the word T-R-A-I-N. But it's there. Okay. So now Krishna in first verse, he speaks of that I spoke, I trained my disciple. Shri Bhagavan Vacha Imam Vivasvate Yogam Proktavan Aham Avyayam Vivasvan Manave Praha Manu Ikshvakave Brahit. So Prabhupada gives word for word yogam as the science of one's relationship to the Supreme. Very important. And it's correct. It's not just linking. Yogam is the science of one's relationship to the Supreme. Proktavan. So, pra-ukta. I instructed. I completely instructed. I trained. Okay? Ukta. Avyayam. Now, very important. Imperishable. But it also means, imperishable means undecaying. Something that does not decay with time. Everything decays. But this knowledge does not decay. Vyaya means to deteriorate. You start with this much, you end up with this much. It lessens. It reduces. This does not lessen, it does not reduce. It's never spent, it's never exhausted. You know that verse from Ishopanishad? Om Purna Mada Purnamida. Many complete wholes come out of the complete, but he remains the complete. He's not diminished. It's a special quality of spirit, not of matter. Matter deteriorates. So this yoga, this science does not deteriorate. Even the word is going to be used in the next verse, even though it may be lost, it doesn't deteriorate. In other words, you may forget to know how it works, but the laws of nature still work. They operate. In other words, the laws of nature don't stop the way they operate before, and the science of Krishna consciousness doesn't change. Very, very interesting. So that means you have nothing new to find in Krishna consciousness. If you have a new Krishna consciousness, it's not Krishna consciousness. Because Krishna consciousness does not change. It's another word for avyayam is unchanging, undecaying, imperishable and unchanging, unexhausting, non-exhausting. Okay. So Krishna says, I Proktavan, and then Vivaswan Praha, I spoke to Vivaswan. Vivaswan spoke to Manu, but Manu also Abravit, he also spoke. So Proktavan, Praha and Abravit. Speaking. Speaking means training. I trained him, he trained him, and he trained him. Parampara. Okay, so the personality of Godhead, Lord Shri Krishna said, I instructed this imperishable science of yoga to the sun god, Vivaswan. Vivaswan instructed it to Manu, the father of mankind, and Manu in turn instructed it to Ikshvaku. Very important. So if we are free from bias, prejudice, then we will accept this statement. But if you come with bias, you say, well, hello, Ikshvaku is a long time ago. Something like 2 million years ago. Okay. Krishna is speaking. You know. That's because of bias, because we disbelieve anything that predates Christian era, you know. So BC and AE. In other words, in the year of our Lord. Before that, everyone was a monkey or an animal, prehistoric, Stone Age. Bias. That's not what is reflected here. Krishna is saying this avyayam, this undeteriorating science was known so long ago. How long ago is going to be the subject of the purport. Now, the other thing straight away we have to note is that this Buddhi Yoga is being mentioned that it was spoken to these great personalities. Imam Vivasvate Yogam, Proktavan Ham Avyayam, Vivaswan, Manu, Ikshvaku. So these are not little people. These are the kings, the rulers of the planets, in fact. And remind ourselves, what is it that this Buddhi Yoga is? Is this science to become free from lusty desires. By the process of executing one's prescribed duty in Krishna consciousness. It's a full phrase. All of those points are very necessary. It's complete. That's what you have learned. Till the end of chapter 3, that's what you have learned. In a summary form. So this science was taught to the king so that he can teach his citizens. That's why, the leaders of men. So he will not only teach them, but he will train them. He will engage them in this way, according to their propensities. Herein we find the history of the Bhagavad Gita traced from a remote time when it was delivered to the royal order of all planets, beginning from the sun planet. So immediately sun planet, not just the earth planet. The kings of all planets are especially meant for the protection of the inhabitants, and therefore the royal order should understand the science of Bhagavad Gita in order to be able to rule the citizens and protect them from material bondage to lust. It's not disjointed. It's a continuation of the topic from chapter 3. Kamesha, Krodesha, Rajaguna, Samana. So that, and it resides in 3 places. The senses, the mind, the intelligence. By engaging in your prescribed duties, you conquer over these lusts. Because you're engaging from the spiritual platform. Krishna gave a delineation superior to dull matter of the senses, superior to the senses of the mind, superior to the mind the intelligence, and superior to the intelligence. So all of these are contaminated, but not the soul. So if you're on the soul platform, you can conquer over lust. Otherwise you can't. It's impossible. So, but it requires training. It requires disciple. You have to be a disciple. You have to be under the instruction of the spiritual master. Human life is meant for cultivation. Now, word cultivation for training. Human life is meant for cultivation of spiritual knowledge in eternal relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and the executive heads of all states and all planets are obliged to impart, again, training, this lesson, this Bhagavad Gita's lesson, to the citizens by education, culture, and devotion. So, very spelled out, by education, by culture, and by devotion. So, you have to educate, you have to tell them. You have to tell them this is what it is. This is the reality. Because unless you're told you're in ignorance, you cannot know by yourself. It has to be told. So telling is there. But culture means you have to cultivate. Like yogurt culture. You can't tell the milk, become yogurt. You have to culture the milk. Then it becomes yogurt. It becomes. It has to change. It has to transform. We have to change. We start lusty. We start with problems. By the culture of Krishna consciousness, you become changed. You don't remain lusty. So it requires training. So education, training, and devotion. In other words, you have to do it wholeheartedly. It cannot be a part-time affair. It has to be, in the 2nd chapter, Vyavasayatmika buddhi ekeha kurunandam. One appointed attention, fixed, undeviating. In the 3rd chapter, Ananya Cheta was mentioned. With your mind undeviated, if you remember, on this. So very important, your mind, your intelligence must be involved. It cannot be a mechanical process. It won't work. Okay. In other words, so that's what preaching is. That's what's preaching. Preaching is not, of course, we start with giving a book. If he doesn't even have a book, he can't even know. But it doesn't stop there. It's not enough. So sometimes, somebody says, well, I got a book so many years ago. Okay. After the book, well, I got a book. I've had a book for so many years. I'm a devotee for so. No, there has to be this training where your mind, your intelligence was supervised. Just like Krishna is saying, I instructed Vivaswan. In other words, the executive heads of all states are intended to spread the science of Krishna consciousness so that the people may take advantage of this great science and pursue a successful path, utilizing the opportunity of the human form of life. So now Srila Prabhupada embarks on, he's going to paint a background to explaining the fact that we're not talking about a few years old philosophy. So he does it in a very wonderful fashion. In this millennium, the sun god is known as Vivaswan, the king of the sun, which is the origin of all planets within the solar system. So then he quotes from Brahma Samhita, Yat Chakshuresha Savita Sakala Grahan, that the sun is the king of all planets, but it does it in obedience to the order of the Lord. The sun is the king of the planets, and the sun god rules the sun planet, which is controlling all other planets by supplying heat and light. And he is rotating under the order of Krishna. So Lord Krishna originally made Vivaswan his first disciple to understand the science of Bhagavad Gita. He's telling Arjuna, you're not the first person I'm telling. I told this same teaching, I taught this before. The Gita is not, therefore, a speculative treatise for the insignificant mundane scholar, but a standard book of knowledge coming down from time immemorial. Standard book of knowledge. Very important. This is not some Hare Krishnas, like their own. No. This is universal. It's not proprietary. It's the heritage of every living being. All of the universe. We're talking about different planets now. What to speak of nations. So nobody should feel it is Indian. The idea of India itself is recent. But the idea of Bhagavad Gita is not recent. So you cannot confine it, reduce it to a confine which is of a recent date. It's almost like saying the sun is India. But the sun predates India, and the sun is universal. Everyone has the benefit. So this idea of confining Krishna, Bhagavad Gita to a certain nation is a mistake. So now Srila Prabhupada quotes from Mahabharata to explain the word coming down from time immemorial. What does it mean, time immemorial? In the Mahabharata, Shanti Parva, we can trace out the history of the Gita as follows. Treta Yug Adho Chatato Vivaswan Manave Dadao Manuscha Loka Brityartham Sutai Ikshava Kave Dadao Ikshava Kuna Cha Kathito Vyapi Lokan Avastita. In the beginning of the millennium known as Treta Yuga, this science of the relationship with the Supreme was delivered by Vivaswan to Manu. Manu, being the father of mankind, gave it to his son Maharaj Ikshvaku, the king of this earth planet and forefather of the Raghu dynasty, in which Lord Ramachandra appeared. Therefore, Bhagavad Gita existed in human society from the time of Maharaj Ikshvaku. So then Srila Prabhupada adds up all these years, and he says, thus some 2,005,000 years ago, Manu spoke the Bhagavad Gita to his disciple and son, Maharaj Ikshvaku. And then he says, so that's the last link mentioned. So then he goes to the link before. When did son speak to Manu? Or when did Krishna speak to the sun? The age of the current Manu is calculated to last some 305,300,000 years, of which 120,400,000 have passed. Accepting that before the birth of Manu, the Gita was spoken by the Lord to his disciple, the sun god Vrindavan, a rough estimate is that the Gita was spoken at least 120,400,000 years ago. 120 million. And in human society it has been extant for 2 million years. So now it is being respoken by the Lord to Arjuna 5,000 years ago. That is the rough estimate of the history of the Gita. I just love Srila Prabhupada's meticulous detail. I mean, you cannot challenge it. It's perfect. This is actually, if you want to learn the art of effective speaking, just study this very carefully. If you want to be a lawyer, you want your argument such that nobody can pick it. Prabhupada has just conclusively, emphatically achieved this conclusion. That so you cannot accuse him of just having a very creative imagination. Very, like down to a few thousand years, very precise. If indeed the Lord spoke to the sun god, it presupposes Manu was not yet born. And Manu was born only 120 million years ago. So the Lord spoke at least that many years ago, if not more. May well be many more hundreds of millions of years before. So very nicely. And then he says that is the rough estimate. Can't even challenge it. That is the rough estimate of the history of the Gita according to the Gita itself and according to the version of the speaker, Lord Shri Krishna. So you may have your own opinion, but your opinion is not the opinion of the Gita. This is what the Gita says. It was spoken to the sun god Vrindavan because he is also Kshatriya and is the father of all Kshatriyas who are descendants of the sun god, or the Surya Vangsha Kshatriyas. There's the Chandra Vangsha Kshatriyas. There's two clans, Chandra Vansha and Surya Vansha. So, in other words, actually, without knowledge of Bhagavad Gita, you can't even be a Kshatriya. You can't. Because that's how you become a Kshatriya. You are protecting the citizens based on a manual, based on certain codes. Those codes are the Bhagavad Gita. That's the basis. Of course, we live in a secular world, and interestingly enough, because they've done away with the Bhagavad Gita as the basis for deciding what is appropriate, what is inappropriate, they don't have any basis now. Actually, if you're keeping up with the madness of the secular world, every year they don't know upon what basis they have to decide right and wrong. So therefore they don't know what is right and wrong. If you are bold enough to challenge, say, well, I disagree with that criteria, most likely you will win, because they don't have a basis. You see, they've done away with any criteria. So they don't know what is wrong with many things, and I'd rather not make them explicit, because it's almost polluting to recount them. But there's so many examples. So now Srila Prabhupada focuses on the first part of the verse, Shri Bhagavan Uvacha. Because Bhagavad Gita is as good as the Vedas, being spoken by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, this knowledge is apaurushaya, superhuman. That means it doesn't have the faults of a purush, of a man, of a human person. To err is human. So therefore this is aparushya. It has no error. There's no mistake. Since the Vedic instructions are accepted as they are, without human interpretation, and the Gita must therefore be accepted without mundane interpretation. It's a bit like a perfect formula. You have to stick to the formula. You can't change it. Change the formula, you change the result. It's no longer the original formula. The mundane wranglers. So Prabhupada then explains that because the history of the Bhagavad Gita is nobody changed it. Vivasvan received it, he gave it as it is to Manu, who gave it as it is to Ikshvaku. So he's saying, he's just explaining a little bit how the mundane wranglers speculate, but then it's no longer Bhagavad Gita. So then he says, therefore Bhagavad Gita has to be accepted as it is from the disciplic succession, and it is described herein that the Lord spoke to the Sun God spoke to his son Manu, and Manu spoke to his son Ikshvaku. So there's a number of lessons here. To accept Bhagavad Gita as it is means to receive it in disciplic succession. It means to be trained by the teacher. It means that one should have benefited from the Bhagavad Gita. Otherwise, Prabhupada would say he's not a teacher, he's a CHEA cheater. If you have to benefit from the lessons in order to pass it on. Now, the thing is, text 2 is there's a lot more in it, even though there's some minutes left. I won't be able to cover it. It's very detailed. Are there any questions? Now, I can invite you to ask questions that go all the way to chapter 1, 2, 3, and the 4th. And ask yourself if you understand the links. And ask questions if you think there's a missing link. If there's a missing connection. How did the story of the Bhagavad Gita reach where it is? Why did Krishna now embark on this idea of telling Arjuna when he spoke it before? You see? So think like that and we'll have some time. We can answer those questions. Are there any questions? Pass the mic.